All right, it's the Breer Report mailbag for October the 10th. Our first question for this week comes from Joe Brenner. That's at Bay Area Brenner on Twitter. This is the second year in a row that we've seen the Niners defense decline. Some folks in the local media think it's because Shanahan wants a quote, yes man to call quote Kyle's defense rather than letting them run their own scheme. Do you think there's any merit to this? I think there's merit to the idea that Kyle Shanahan has a very defined vision for what he wants on defense and a defined vision for what he wants in his football team. So I don't think that that's baseless. I think that absolutely exists. But I think that's existed in a lot of different places over the years. I think that exists to some degree with Sean McVay in Los Angeles. At times, Sean McVay's been more involved in the defense than people realize. He was very involved in the defense in their playoff run in 2018, which ended with a Super Bowl loss to the Patriots. Bill Belichick was more involved in offense than a lot of people realized over the years and had a vision for what he wanted offensively. Didn't mean that he wouldn't let the guy running that side of the ball, the coordinator on that side of the ball, run the show. But there was a level of oversight that the head coach had on that side of the ball, even though the head coach's background was on the other side of the ball. So I think that absolutely exists in San Francisco. Kyle Shanahan does know what he wants from a defense, but he's traditionally allowed his defensive coordinators to work within those parameters to build their own defense. And I think what's really instructive about where they are right now is to understand the history of the last couple of years. So obviously, for Kyle Shanahan's first few years in San Francisco, his first 4 years, Robert Saleh was the defensive coordinator. They were on the same page in what they wanted. It was a Seattle style of defense. They groomed DeMeco Ryans as the linebackers coach to take over for Saleh, and so they had the next one ready to go. And DeMeco Ryans was able to evolve what they were doing a little bit more on the pressure side, and keep the defense fresh and new while working within the constraints of where they've been. Now, coming out of that, the Niners tried to bring in guys from the outside because they didn't have an internal candidate the same way they had DeMeco Ryans ready to go when Ryans went to Houston. So they looked at bringing Jeff Ulbrich over from the Jets, who's now the interim coach there in New York. They looked at a variety of different names of guys who'd had background, working in the sort of system that they wanted to run. That didn't really work out. So the next guy up in their building was Nick Sorensen. But ultimately, coming out of the 2021 season, which of course, or the 2022 season, which of course ended with a NFC title game loss to the Eagles, um, Shanahan looked at his roster, saw a team that was ready to win, right now, that had been to consecutive NFC title games, and made the decision that they needed a veteran voice. They needed somebody who'd done it there before. He owed it to the players to give them somebody who was ready to roll, and they weren't projecting into the role of defensive coordinator. So they decided Nick Sorensen wasn't quite ready for the role yet. So they go with Steve Wilks, who's coming from outside the system. I think that was a little awkward throughout last year. They were able to get a pretty good level of play, but there were points of frustration for Shanahan. Obviously, that boiled over to some degree in the Super Bowl, and now they go with Nick Sorensen as their defensive coordinator. I tell you all of that to say that Sorensen is somebody that they saw along as a guy that was eventually going to be the defensive coordinator there. It wasn't a puppet for Kyle Shanahan. It's just a guy who was not ready quite yet in their minds when DeMeco Ryans left in early 2023. And quite frankly, like, I know some people in that building regret not going to Nick Sorensen in early 2023. So will there be some growing pains? Yes. They've had some injury issues that they've had to fight through. Losing Javon Hargrave didn't help. The team's made up a little bit differently this year. So I think what you're going to see over the course of the year, they're going to lean on Chris Kasarik to continue developing the defensive line and to get a little bit more out of those defensive linemen. They hope to get more out of Leonard Floyd up front. And as that evolves, I think you're going to see a defense that maybe isn't quite as dominant as the defenses of recent past. There's been some age there too. But a defense that's capable of playing with a lead and a team that's probably a little bit more reliant on its offense, which it should be as Brock Purdy, grows into the role of franchise quarterback.